Welcome to a virtual historical tour of Port Williams. My name is Evan Jennings, and I work as a heritage interpreter for Randall House Museum located on Main Street in Wolfville.
And my name is Jillian Watson, also a worker at the Randall House Museum, textile assistant.
Today, we will be looking at a small slice of the multitude of history that makes up the community of Port Williams. We will start with an introduction of the overall history crossing the Cornwallis River into the community before moving on to discuss some of the notable buildings at the entrance of the community. We will turn on to Stars Point Road, where we will discuss the history of Stars Point and the Star family before viewing the Planter Monument and the Stars Point Cemetery. We will then finish our tour of Stars Point by turning onto Church Street and discussing the history found on it. We will then direct our way towards Sutton Road, eventually turning onto Belcher Street and discussing the educational history of Port Williams before concluding the virtual tour back towards the entrance of the community. The Cornwallis River that we cross on our entry into Port Williams was an important resource before the arrival of the New England planters to the area. The Mi'kmaq people who traveled seasonally through Mi'kma'ki, modern-day Nova Scotia, frequented this area and Emtabin, which is what the name was for the Gasbro area. They especially visited these areas in times of the year when fishing was particularly good. They named the river Jejebwatuk, meaning a deep and narrow river. When the Acadians arrived at this end of the valley, expanding from Port Royal to the other end of the valley, they called the river the Habitant, and the river had previously been called Rivière Saint-Antoine by Samuel de Champlain during his time in the Annapolis Valley as well. After the Acadian deportation in 1755 and the arrival of New England planters in the 1760s, the river was named the Cornwallis River after Governor Cornwallis. The river continued its value as a resource for fishing and for shipping.
The name Port Williams was chosen to commemorate General Sir Fenwick Williams, born around 1800 at Annapolis Royal and rose to be a major British military figure. Fenwick Williams played a major role in the Crimean War, notably the Siege of Cars, which is reflected in the name of Cars Street. Williams was later appointed as the governor of Nova Scotia, the first Nova Scotian to be named governor. His appointment as governor is said to be heavily influenced by Nova Scotians not being entirely sold on joining the Confederation being called Canada, something they hoped a local governor's influence could change. The village of Port Williams itself later became an incorporated village in 1951.
As we cross into Port Williams, we will discuss the first building we can see on our right. In 1856, Irish-born immigrant James Regan established an inn for travelers called Balaclover House. Originally born in Ireland in 1797, Regan immigrated to the area with his family in the mid-1800s before passing away in 1875. After his death, his son Michael served as innkeeper until his death as well. Michael's wife, Mary Regan, as we can see according to this marriage ledger, remarried in July of 1868 to Moses Orr, who became the proprietor of the inn for many years, also operating a bar. Orr's bar would eventually suffer from growing prohibition feelings across Nova Scotia, and one story tells of a South Mountain farmer who would walk his cow to Orr's home to exchange a pint of milk for a pint of whiskey, an exchange that became a regular occurrence over many years.
In 1856, Michael Regan purchased this property, though the longtime resident was actually his brother, Captain John Regan. As a ship captain and his ship owner, he was known in the community to help children make and sail small boats in the harbor.
As we turn onto Stars Point Road, we will discuss the history of Stars Point. Mi'kmaq people who seasonally utilize this area as well, calling it Nesudwik, meaning extending between two rivers. As we can see in this map, Stars Point extends between the Cornwallis River below and the Cunard River above, leading to the name Nesudwik, extending between two rivers.
The area is now named after the Star family, shortly after the Acadian deportation, when the call went out to the New England planter families to establish themselves across Nova Scotia. A call was received in Norwich, Connecticut. There, Samuel Starr Jr., among 3 other men, journeyed to Nova Scotia to investigate. They arrived in Halifax on July 19, 1759, with the intention to settle in Chignecto. Starr did not favor the land available in Chignecto and feared the land he liked in Onslow was already promised to other planters before him. The story goes that Samuel traveled towards the Annapolis Valley and climbed the tallest tree available to him near Horton to get a good view of the valley before him. This eventually led him across the Cornwallis River, where he came across a location that he found had incredible promise, the location known today as Starr's Point. On his journey home, he kept this information to himself and boasted to other investigating planters that Horton was the place to be. Starr returned home to Norwich, Connecticut, and the following year returned with families, livestock, and necessities to leave behind life in Connecticut for a life in Nova Scotia. As a leader for the planters, Samuel Starr himself received approximately 1,000 acres of land.
With New England planters settled, and Samuel Starr having received his land, seemingly everything was settled for the settlers. Yet, shortly after, the outbreak of the American Revolution threatened the security of coastal living planters across British North America. To protect the settlers here, the governor called for an establishment of a soldiers' barracks on the land of Samuel Starr. The barracks underwent multiple changes over the coming years, and once the American threat came to pass, the barracks was sold and today operates as an inn. Should you wish to visit it, a monument erected for the New England planters by the Port Williams Women's Institute in 1983 is available to visit in Starr's Point as well.
While visiting the Planters Monument, I recommend driving a slight bit further up the road to visit the Starr's Point Cemetery. Here you can see the generations of families and residents who have called this area their home. A few specific graves I will highlight for you are May Rosina Pratt Starr, a member of the Pratt family who journeyed to New York City to open her new own bookbinding store with her sister in the late 1800s. After her sister tragically passed away from typhoid fever and nearly having succumbed to the illness herself, May Rosina returned home to Nova Scotia and married Richard Starr in 1903. She lived the remainder of her life in the area and served as a vital person in the new establishment and running of the Wolfville Historical Society and served as the first curator for Randall House Museum. She was an active and vital member of the community until her death in 1962. Another grave you may wish to visit here is the grave of Alice Colville and his wife, Rhoda Wright. A famous Canadian artist, Alice Colville lived in the area for over 40 years before his death in 2013. And I urge you to look up some of his artwork, which, should you be familiar with the landscape surrounding Port Williams and Wolfville, you will recognize the inspiration it had on his many pieces.
Let us now journey our way back towards the main section of Port Williams by turning off of Starr's Point Road onto Church Street, which runs from Starr's Point towards Kentville. Named after 2 potential sources, the street has had 6 churches in its history. It's also believed that a Colonel Church supposedly raided the Canard River for cattle. I will leave you to be the judge of how this street got its name. The church that does remain on the street is St. John's Anglican Church. The church is believed to be designed by John Burbage, who came over to Nova Scotia with Cornwallis in 1749. He was one of the original members to receive land in the Cornwallis area and held multiple provincial and local positions appointed to him. Construction began on the church in 1804, and while it would not be fully completed until 1812, services began in the church in 1810. The old Meeting House Antiques, which is next door, as the name suggests, was the old meeting house used before the church was built. If you have the chance, you should drop in and look for some antiques.
As we drive along Church Street, I will note that further up on your right is the community of Canard and the Canard River, one of the Acadian names that lasted through the modern day. In French, a canard is a duck, seeing the Acadians took notice of the animals that were likely quite populous here, or they adapted the name for their interactions with the Mi'kmaq, as they called the location Upkeech Kamuche Wakade, meaning a place abound in little ducks. However, the names were influenced. They both agreed that the area did in fact have many ducks.
We will turn left onto Highway 358 and keep right to get ourselves onto Sutton Road. As we have a bit of time before our next destination, I'll discuss with you the shipping industry that was based out of Port Williams Harbor. As the agricultural industry, and particularly the apple industry, was quite large across the Annapolis Valley, the shipping of this produce out of Port Williams was quite extensive. While many ships docked prior, the industry was helped immensely by the construction of a long dock in 1930, and by 1938, apples shipped to the European market were over 500,000 barrels. Since 1928, over 14 other countries have docked their ships at Port Williams for the shipment of goods overseas. Many Port Williams residents had their livelihoods and jobs invested in the port-based shipping industry, such as the men photographed here around 1930, who are from left to right: Cyrus Steele, Kemp Bezanson, Bill Chase, Herman Porter, Seth Huntley, and Wilfred Green.
In 1972, the government invested over $100,000 into the repairing and upkeep of the port, but the shipping industry was largely being replaced by the trucking industry. This article, written by Wendy Elliott, shows the decline the shipping industry experienced throughout the 1970s, as longtime Port Williams residents remarked how the port has drastically changed. Today, the shipping industry of the port is history.
As we turn onto Belcher Street, going left, we will see on our right the Port Williams Elementary School, followed shortly after by the Booker School, two institutions that educate the youth of the Port Williams area. Land was originally set aside for a school in 1761, but this land eventually fell under the control of the Anglican diocese. The original school in Port Williams was built around 1864, as the Free Schools Act had just passed in Nova Scotia, giving larger access to education. As previously, school was taught in private settings, either at home or through religious institutions. Pictured here is the first schoolhouse that had been built on Church Street. This photograph here shows a later iteration of the school near where the present school is located today.
As we approach the entrance of Port Williams, where we began our tour, I will take a moment to thank you very greatly for taking the time to learn a little bit alongside me about the village of Port Williams. There is a great amount of incredible history I did not get to discuss in this video, and if you'd like to share any further information you have, or if you feel I made any mistakes, do not hesitate to let me know in the comment section below. I want to take this opportunity to urge you to involve yourself more with the Port Williams history if you found this video interesting to you. Prescott Museum is an excellent historical site which I had the pleasure to visit the other day, and they will be able to provide you with a great historical experience.
The Port Williams History Committee was a major support for this project, and they would love your support and inclusion in their committee, which meets the first Wednesday of each month starting in September. An excellent piece of work done by the Port Williams Women's Institute called the Port Remembers was an invaluable resource for this research, and should you be interested in exploring it yourself, the Port Williams Library should be your #1 stop, with the book also being available digitally at archive.org. Thank you once again.